Hey guys, how's it going? This is Brown Gay Realness, and this is the first video for my new channel that I'm starting. Um, Basically, I'm a management consultant. I work in behavior, so I love behavior and I love studying and I love research and especially South Asian culture because I'm an Indo-Fijian person. So I love studying my culture and history. So I thought I'd come at you guys with my first video as 5 things that we owe from South Asia. Oh shit. So the 5 things that we owe to South Asia. Number 1, mathematics. So math as like an abstract concept has been around for like tens of thousands of years. Like it's almost innate and inherent to human beings. In a basic sense, almost all animals have some type of ability to sense number quantities. And like we've seen this in dolphins and crows, also humans, I think squids, octopuses, chimpanzees, like so many animals. Um, Interestingly, humans are not like unique or even like the best at it too. Like our maximum ability, I think, supposedly comes from is that like caps out at 4, which means that like so if you think that if we're looking at like 4 people on stage moving individually, we can keep kind of like track of each of them individually. But as soon as you add like a 5th person into there, or as many people as you add, that group can't be broken up evenly into 4s or into 4 groups, then our brain loses track of it. And the way they noticed this was with some tests with a chimpanzee that like is able to like differentiate with 9 numbers at the same time in different positions. I can send out a link if you guys want. Um, so this is actually like really important to how Houdini played a lot of his like illusions on stage, was by making it look like there was a number of people going on stage and adding himself in the way and like pulling himself out so that people wouldn't really be able to keep track of him. And like I'm just saying this all allegedly, like don't take me at word value. I really just wanted to do a YouTube video, so this is kind of just like my like, hey, if you guys hate it, let me know. If you love it, let me know. If you have any questions, I'll do more videos. Getting back to math though. So the oldest maths that we can see in Mesopotamia, the oldest maths that we can see so far come from like Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Vedic cultures at around the same time, around 2000 BC-ish. That's kind of like a controversial number for Vedic culture, but I can do another video on that because like Indian history is super controversial. And essentially, much of our modern mathematics descends from Indian numerals, math and numerals that were translated into Arabic around the Middle Ages and then transferred into Europe during the Islamic Golden Age. Concepts like zero, addition and subtraction, multiplication, division, even like the symbols for those 4 concepts as well. The decimal system, negative numbers, sine, cosine, circumference of a sphere, fractions, Pythagorean triplets, quote unquote, and the Pythagorean theorem, quote unquote. It's actually like quite a bit older and possibly came to Greece with Buddhist missionaries. Can do another video on that anyways. But all of these things were already elaborated on by acharyas, which is acharya is Sanskrit for teachers, from about the 8th century BC, and some might even say the 17th century. And these are people named Brahmagupta, Aryabhat, Katyayan, Kannad, and all the way up to the Kerala school of mathematics around the 15th century. So there's like a very long history of like the calculus, algebra stuff that we do. Interestingly, many Western finds were already discussed in Indian mathematics like centuries before they were discussed in Western mathematics. And these were things like pi, the square root of 2, a power series. I literally tried to figure it out. I can't figure it out. Google it. You're all smart. Like search it and tell me if you figure it out and can explain it simply. Let me know. Algebra, calculus, and this thing called the arctangent, something to do with the circle. I just keep on getting like PTSD flashbacks from high school math. So we're gonna stop it at that for that. Basically, they all came from the creation of formal numbers. So these never existed really in Europe. So the Romans had numbers, and it seems that there's always been some type of like essential mathematics, practical mathematics for trading that were based on weights found in the Indus Valley civilization. That's another separate thing. But it seems to have transferred across multiple cultures and civilizations, or at least become kind of common throughout multiple cultures and civilizations as a way of trading. But the math that we know, it didn't really exist because if you looked at Roman numerals, they're a lot harder than the numbers we have today, the symbols for abstract concepts. So these numbers were actually first recorded as shapes in the Brahmi script in the Gwalior inscriptions sometime between 265 and 230 BC, I believe, allegedly. and these kind of became the standard way that mathematics was taught in the Indian schooling system, in the Gurukul system. So when Arab traders around the mid 600s, and I think the first mosque was built in India around 626 CE, so very soon after Muhammad's Hijra, I think is what it's called, Hijra, from Medina to Mecca. Muslim fans, like, tell me what you think if I got it wrong. So the first mosque in India was built around 626 CE, and these Arab traders, when they started really like interacting with the people of South India, so Muziris, Cochin, like these ancient trading ports, they encountered Indian thought, Indian logic, and Indian mathematics, and then transferred a lot of these and translated them from, I think it's Proto-Tamil at that time, into Arabic. And like this wasn't only mathematics, this was like other things as well, like for example, the distillation of essential oils, the use of a specific type of woods, which is a type of iron that was used in Damascus steel, which was like a very well-known type of sword in the 17th century. And then as well, like interestingly, fables. So some of you might know the story Aesop's Fables. So they actually like descend from this this book called Panchatantra in India, and that was translated as well into Arabic and called Kalila wa Dimna. And these are stories like the tortoise and the hare, the mouse and the lion, or the mouse and the elephant, depends what story you're reading. Yeah, so it's super fascinating, guys. So incidentally, some religious history buffs might know that around like the 1100s, the Catholic Church started making announcements against things called the devil's script, or symbols and like occult knowledge, and like forbidding people to practice them because they thought it was like obsessed with the devil, right? These are actually like a reference to the rise of mathematics and alchemy from India through the Islamic regions of Europe and Northern Africa. And a lot of these like devil's numbers, devil's symbols were like representing mathematical symbols. Took me a little while to figure out why this was so controversial, like why mathematics was so controversial to Europeans. And essentially there's some theorists that say that it's like the concept of zero itself. So zero itself is like the absence of everything. And it came out of this Buddhist idea called shunyata. And shunyata basically says that like you have to relieve yourself of maya, and the absence of maya is nothingness, right? And that's where the concept of zero came out, and how that influenced the idea of mathematics in India as well. So this idea of zero was actually like really, really controversial because one in Europe was considered the lowest common denominator, the lowest number, because alpha, omega, God was one and the only. There was three that went into one, right? The myriad angels turned into three that are all really just one Godhead. So even you might know that there's a story of like a pope who I think around the 1100s or 1200s, there's a couple of like pictures around, you'd have to like Google it, I can find the name for you guys, but he was essentially like demonized as like being in league with the devil and like learning the devil's script and the devil's language. And my idea is kind of, I think that he was probably learning mathematics, or as well alchemy, which came from India. So the philosopher's stone that a lot of people reference in Western mythology and mysticism actually descends from the bodice money from India, which is like, I can get into a whole alchemy thing on another side if you want. But that was part of what was transferred into Arabia from like that southern ports of Cochin, Muziris, etc. So anyways, sorry, back to the normal shit. Back to what I'm talking about. Sorry, I get so distracted, guys. I'm sorry. So it became like such underground knowledge that like people really hid it. But the same thing happens like in any culture, right? Like if you look at North Korea, for example, Western media still feeds its way into there, and it becomes a class privilege thing that goes really underground. So there's the same thing with sorcery and like witchcraft, quote unquote, and like these occult signs and symbols and occult knowledge. They kind of like fed through the classes and became like a secret underground high class, like, you know, open secret. And then through that, it started to lay the foundations for what we would see in Western science and things like that. Which is really, Western science is more of a negation of Abrahamic traditions. And it kind of like sees it in like Western essentialism places Western science as like the be all end all, without realizing that it's like kind of a universal science. And anyways, can get into that a whole another time. So number two of the things that come from South Asia are plastic surgery. This one's kind of gruesome, but also really interesting. And we wouldn't have the Real Housewives without it. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Of course, Indians started the whole trend of like super gaudy, lots of gold, showing off your cars and big houses, right? Like, I mean, hey, it's a part of us. So can anyone name the father of plastic surgery? 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. His name was Sushruth. And if you didn't put it down in the comments, it's okay. I'll just like burn you later. But if you did, I'm going to give you a shout out in my next video. So anyways, the father of plastic surgery was this guy named Sushruth, and he lived from about 1200 BC to about 600 BC. And that's a controversial date again. I'm going to do another video on Indian history. So the legend is that he learned surgery from the god of medicine, Dhanvantari, and then practiced it on the banks of the Banaras somewhere in his ashram. And Banaras is like the modern day name, is like one of the names for modern day city of Varanasi, or Varanasi. So many different pronunciations because it's like it's quite a holy city. So Kashi is like there as well. And so it's not sure if he was like one guy or if he was multiple guys, and like, or possibly that this was a title attached to an Ayurvedic sage. But supposedly Sushruth categorized something like 700 different preparations of different herbs and vegetables, some like 60 some different types of surgeries, like tons of things. And basically he came up with a lot of the tools that are still used today in like non-Western cultures for like eye surgery, tooth extraction, C-section, treating hemorrhoids, draining abscesses, and a method of inoculation against smallpox using cowpox pus. So basically, apparently they would stab the cowpox, the cowpox, to get the pus out, and then stab someone else with it to like get the pus into to their bloodstream. To talk about it anymore. And he's also considered the inventor of the nose job, which I think a lot of Jewish American princesses would be super sad if they found out he wasn't alive. So like, all you Japs out there, please send blessings to Sushruth and to me and like my videos. So anyways, anyone that's South Asian will recognize that in our culture we have a variant of some phrase of mera naak kat jayega, which means to cut off my nose, which is a kind of a way of like saying that you're going to like cause me some type of deep societal shame. I'm going to be ashamed to like see my friends and stuff like that. And a lot of gay South Asians will understand this phrasing as well, but even like intercaste marriage, intercultural marriage, interreligious marriage, like it all like can play into this. It used to. I think it's kind of dying out now. So this is actually like a real punishment around the 1200s BC, and it's like attested to a lot in literature as well. So if you did like some really heinous, like egregious crime, so rape or murder for men, or in the case of women, adultery, which like, let's be honest, hashtag patriarchy existed, and will still exist, which is why we have to fight it. But you would have your nose cut off as punishment. So Sushruth came up with a way to like relieve the pain of these people, and what they would do is they would cut a flap from the top of the forehead and pull it down across the nose, flip it around and reshape the nose that way. Or they would cut a flap from the cheek under one of the eyes, pull it over, and then reshape the nose that way. And these are still actually the two most commonly used practices for nose surgery today. Fascinating, right? Fascinating. Get it, girl, Sushruth. Number 3 things that come from India: sewage systems. I know we all have a lot of shit to deal with in our life, but like, let's thank our ancestors for teaching us how to flow it on down the river. And I'm not saying this actually came from India, but it's interesting how timelines can work out and how cultural transfers have worked in the past, and what we know about how commerce in the ancient world worked. So some people might say that Knossos of the Minoan civilization in Greece was the first planned city, and it had extensive sewer drainage, indoor water systems, and it was a planned city. But the newest evidence, so circa 2018, comes from Rakhigarhi in India. So what we know, Rakhigarhi was a planned city, and it was dated to about 6500 BCE. And it turns out Rakhigarhi had planned waterworks, so they would have ways to divert river flows into pools and cisterns in the city and then have them flow throughout the city. So there's some thought that they might have had extensive gardens, that they were used for irrigation as well. And as well, we know that like most of the houses in Rakhigarhi apparently were 2-story houses that had a cistern on the top of the floor, and that would collect rainwater, and that would be pumped down into a dedicated washing room using tile, not ceramic tile, but just tile in general to like flow the same way the Romans would have. So I think it's like really fascinating. I can do a whole nother video on Rocky Gardi, but we're already like getting a little bit long. So let's go to the next one. Number 4 that we owe to India is the orange. So yes, this is the bane of existence of every single drinking game, orange. And both the word and the color, interestingly, both came from India, but by different roots and different origins somewhat. So genetically, we know the citrus itself originated in the Himalayan foothills around 6000 BC. And citrus, basically wherever a new type of citrus is able to grow, you're going to get a new type of fruit. So it made its way down south from the Himalayan foothills into South India, and it left India to the east with the Austronesian expansion. So the Austronesian people were groups of people, multiple groups of people that left sometime between 60,000 and 35,000 BC, allegedly, I think. This is like, I might have faulty knowledge, don't quote me, just like Google it yourself, you're all smart. And they basically like walked from southern India all the way through and became what are kind of known as like the indigenous peoples of like the Philippines, the Malay Peninsula, all the way down through Melanesia and into Australia, and like the ancestors of Australian Aboriginals, potentially, allegedly. So these people took oranges going to the east, and then the Arab traders starting around the 600s started to take oranges into the west. So allegedly, like there's some theory that I've been reading that the myth of Jason and the Argonauts, where he goes to search for the golden apples, he goes to the Garden of the Hesperides, that potentially that Homer was referring to, I think it's Homer, was referring to oranges in Libya. So something interesting there. The first recorded real kind of like, we wrote shit down, we brought this from here, is bitter oranges being planted in the Emirate of Sicily around the 800s. And so the Emirate of Sicily was part of that whole kind of like Moorish Empire, and like there's different emirates that were placed along, and they all kind of like saw themselves as like a unified pan-Islamic, like kind of the same way that you would see kind of like the oil producing Islamic countries, like how they have kind of like a global kind of like trade network, a similar currency, that type of thing, right? And they have a similar like kinship style, similar rule, and things like that. So that existed, and the Emirates of Sicily ended up bringing bitter oranges into Iberia to the Moors, and then that's where you got all of these orange trees planted in Valencia, in like the south as well, and then they made their way all the way up through to Asturias and stuff like that. So the first sweet oranges were brought by the Portuguese traders, I believe, with Vasco da Gama around sometime in the 1400s from South India. And they brought along with it like the word as well. So oranges themselves were already known in European culture, but they didn't have the name orange. But the specific sweet oranges were brought with the Portuguese, and with that came the orange word. So the Sanskrit word for orange is naranga, which in Prakrit languages like Proto-Tamil became naram and naranjam. And this transferred, and so supposedly this is where the Iberian words for laranja and naranja come from. So I know I'm butchering shit. I'm so sorry. I really apologize. The other side of the transferring of the words could have come from naranga, going from Sanskrit to the Persian narang, from narang to going to Arabic and turning into naranj, with Sicilio-Arabic. So again, that Sicilio-Arabic Empire dropping the first N to become orange or orange, I'm not 100% sure, and turning into the Italian, Proto-Italian Mila Arancio. So Mila Arancio, Mila means fruit, coming from Greek fruit, and Arancio just meant like that kind of like red-orange fruit. And is the derivation off of orange, right? So the French decided to change that Mila part to poum. So Mila meant fruit, poum meant fruit in French. So they changed the pronunciation and then started calling it pomerange, and then which just became orange in English from like the 1600s. Interesting, right? And lastly, number 5 of those things that come from India, that we owe to India, is the unicorn. So around 400 BC, there was a guy named Ctesias who wrote a book called Indica. So Ctesias was like a philosopher and traveler. I believe he traveled to like Baghdad, he traveled to like Persepolis, like blah, 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 blah. And he wrote a book about all of his travels that was kind of like this travel literature that got transferred back to Europe. So he met with a lot of Persians, wrote a bunch of books on Persia and turned it into Persica, and then also wrote what Persian people thought and knew about India into a book called Indica. So he never went himself, but he supposedly had grabbed first-hand accounts, etc., etc., etc. So it's basically a description of what Persians at the time thought about India and thought they knew about India as well. So in it, he describes a bunch of animals and describes an animal with elephant-like legs, a body like a horse, and a long face with a horn in it. And so interestingly, he knew the difference between the Indian rhinoceros and the oryx. So the oryx is a type of horned antelope, both of which existed and were real. And he refers to all three animals in the same sentence. So it at least posits that he thought that was a real animal, and that the people that were telling him this thought that that existed as a real animal alongside the Indian rhinoceros and the oryx. So people have said he might have been making it up because of some golden mice that he also describes burrowing in the sands, which were said to like exist in like the sands just to the northwest of India, so in like Kazakhstan, Afghanistan. Herodotus also talks about these weird gold digging ants that make golden mounds. And you think it's really funny until you realize that they were probably referring to burrowing marmots that exist in that area that burrow into the sand and come out covered in sand that has gold dust in it, and then as well termites in the area that use that sand to create their termite mounds, which ends up looking golden because it has the golden sand in it. They just didn't have the same language that we did to be able to understand those concepts, so they just used the words that were available to them to describe what they were seeing or hearing, I guess, about. What's interesting though is that there's like multiple cultures around that time that kind of talk about the same thing. So in the Semitic cultures, they talk about the Re'em, which I'm going to get to in a second. In the Babylonian cultures, they talk about the Rimu. In the Chinese cultures, they call it the Chirin. And in Hindi cultures, in Indian cultures as well, in the Shiv Mahapuran, it's referred to as the Bringi. So interestingly, Bringi is like, this is kind of how you can see like that change of pantheon as time keeps growing. So Bringi, as I knew him as growing up, so he's supposedly a sage, and his form is that of some type of large animal that's covered in woolly fur, and he has a horn in the top of his head. So as I was taught, it was that every god at a temple has kind of their like doorkeepers, their gatekeepers. So for Durga, it would be Hanuman and Batuk Behero. For Vishnu it would be Jay and Vijay, and for Shiva I was taught that it was Nandi and Bringi. And then slowly I guess Bringi has gotten out because people don't understand who or what Bringi was, so I very rarely see a reference to him, right? But it's just interesting that like he was actually like a mythological character, and that was how he was described. And I specifically remember asking my dad and saying like, what is Bringi? And he goes, he's just a type of animal. Because it's basically like been so long that it's been forgotten from our culture. Like it's been around for so long that we've completely forgot what this Bringi thing is, right? But the word unicorn basically, so when the Bible was being translated into Greek and Latin, both of those ended up using the words like coined by Ctesias to describe the Re'em, which was symbolized as like the power of God. It was an animal described like the unicorn that was used to symbolize the power of God. And so they used the words that Ctesias created called monokeros and unicornis, which is where it started to show up in Christian motifs as like a symbol for the power of God, and then becoming associated with Christ during the Middle Ages and in those tapestries where you see a virgin kind of like stroking the unicorn. And then as like we've come through the Renaissance and kind of like the Western atheism that is more just a denial of like Abrahamism, we've seen the unicorn become kind of this like generic symbol for purity and innocence. So yeah, guys, that was 5 things that we owe to South Asia. That's mathematics, the unicorn. Oh, wait, hold on a sec. That's mathematics, plastic surgery, sewage systems, the orange, and the unicorn. I'm going to do some more videos. Hopefully you guys liked it. And yeah, let me know if you want to see anything. Let me know if I suck. Tell me how I can improve for sure. I'm probably going to be making more videos, and happy Pride Month. And yeah, everything I said is like allegedly, like don't quote it. You're all smart. You all have 2 hands. Like fucking Google something.